Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to My Money, Your Money, where we talk about all things money with the goal of closing the racial wealth gap. We're brought to you by our generous sponsors, Demesman and Dover Accident Attorneys, FAMU Mary, the AARP, and the Palm Beach Solid Waste Authority. I'm your host, Brigette Lumpkins. I earned an MBA from Wharton, and I've worked at such firms as Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs, serving institutional and private clients, as well as raising capital for investment funds. I am very pleased today to welcome our guest, Roche Whittle, who is a marketer specializing in the Fintech industry. And she currently works for TradeStation Group, an online brokerage company where she is a founding member of their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. Earlier in Roche's career, she worked in wealth management and has a business advising wealth advisors on marketing their firms. So I don't want to go on and on about her. I'll let her tell us a little bit more about herself. Roche, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Brigette, for having me. Yes, my name is Roche Whittle. I currently work for TradeStation. Thank you. That was a beautiful introduction, by the way. I think you hit on some very good points. Um, uh, I currently work a lot on the brand marketing side, launching brand campaigns for my company. TradeStation is a fintech firm. We allow users to trade options, stocks, futures, and crypto on our platform. Um, uh, I'm a Black woman in the space. It has been a long road. I've been in traditional finance my entire career. And right now, working in fintech, it's a little bit of a change, but it's something that I aspire towards, and I'm here now.
Okay, well, I'm really excited because it is true. There's a bit of a unicorn, nest there, being a Black woman in fintech. And so, before we really dig in, I want to make sure our audience knows what fintech is, because everybody who watches the show isn't in finance. That's why they're watching. And when you talk about traditional finance or TradFi, is like the crypto people, cryptoteers, crypto bros, whatever, crypto
Mhm.
talks about it. And I know that's not exclusively your focus, but you have experience in that space. But can you tell us, what is fintech as an industry, as a sector?
Okay. So, first, let's start back in terms of traditional finance. Traditional finance is everything that you know in terms of a financial institution. And when you add in the technology piece, whether that's like using blockchain or using cloud services or using any type of technology to layer on top of traditional finance, that makes up that fintech portion. So think of it as anything that has your traditional view or your normal view of what finance is, and then taking it to the next level using technology. That could even be artificial intelligence, different ways to bring people together. When we talk about like blockchain or decentralized finance, having payment systems that you can use your crypto and transfer it to someone else across the world. You're using technology. That's a part of like a fintech company. So that's essentially what you can see as like what a fintech company would be. At TradeStation, our financial meets technology is the fact that we offer an online platform for people to trade. So it's a means that you have a traditional finance angle of investing in stocks and using online technologies and tools to be able to trade efficiently.
So would your competitors be like E-Trade or Robinhood?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Because I think that those are just companies that people know, right? And your job is to get the brand out there. And so
Right.
that is a benchmark for folks. And I think if you think of traditional finance as being a bank, it's doing your banking through an app, and that's a fintech company, or paying people
Exactly.
through an app like Cash App or Venmo.
Right.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. So, earlier today I was reading PitchBook, and for the audience out there, PitchBook is a online database and resource that people subscribe to in the financial services industry to get insight into things that are happening within the industry. And there was an article about the female leadership gap in the metaverse, and that was a little disheartening to me because you theoretically, right, these virtual worlds are supposed to be more egalitarian than our analog lives that we've been living all this time. So I really, you mentioned, you made reference to the fact that you're a Black woman in fintech. And so, what is your experience or what are your thoughts on that, especially leading a diversity effort at your firm,
Mm-hmm.
about the lack of presence of even in the metaverse, in virtual realities, and these firms that are popping up around them, the lack of female leadership, and I would presume,
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's Black folks too.
Yes, so I think it starts in the real world. So you can't expect a metaverse or a virtual world to not mimic some issues that are in the real world. We
Mhm.
have real world problems and we bring that into a digital space. Uh, and right now, the real world is what it is. It kind of looks like this, where I have to say, I am a Black woman in fintech, and that's kind of a unicorn.
Mhm.
And it translates into digital spaces.
Right, right. And when you look at remedies for that, where do you think one starts if you're charting new courses, making up new, like you're starting new kinds of companies? The
Mhm.
virtual space is a new opportunity. How do you disrupt that pattern? And are these questions you talk about internally in your DEI council?
They are, because I think it first starts with access, because a lot of communities, Black communities, they don't have the access to the information out there that I can be. I have this. I can be in finance, or I see someone there, so then I can achieve it. Or what do I need? What are the tools that I need? What's the education that I need? A lot of times they don't know that information, and they don't even know that it exists. So they don't know, like, oh, well, I can actually be a broker, or I can actually be a programmer for a fintech company. I can actually start my own mining rig, for example. A lot of times, like, those that concept is so foreign. So
Okay,
I
so
think it starts there.
can you explain what a mining rig is for our audience?
So essentially, a mining rig is, think of it as a rudimentary concept, a box with computing software that helps, that basically mines Bitcoin
Mhm.
or any type of digital assets, that works on proof of work.
Right. Okay. So now we're getting a little advanced.
So
We did a
is
lot of
that a little
crypto.
bit too high level?
We
Maybe I
did a
should
lot
come
of
down a little
crypto. We
bit.
did a lot of crypto last week and talked a lot about all of the stuff that's going on in the space. And I don't want to
Mm,
sugarcoat that, but because I have you as a Black woman here, I really want to talk about getting access to that. And so, rewinding just a little bit, you brought up sort of the skills or capabilities or educational background that one might have. So, if you find this merging of technology and finance interesting, and you are a young person or even a more experienced person looking to make a switch, what would they need to do? What important skills are valued in the fintech sector?
Bridget, I think I first want to touch on the fact that we've definitely changed as a society in terms of how we consume information. It's
Mhm.
no longer I'm going to go to a 4-year college, or I need to get into an Ivy League school, and that's the only way for you to consume information and educate yourself. Start with a Google search. Start with looking up a video. Everyone has a cell phone. Start with following someone that is talking about these things. I think that it's there in terms of, you don't have to go to an institution to learn about what is blockchain, what is crypto, what is the metaverse. Search it, type it into your phone if you don't have a laptop. I think that's first where it starts. Um, you could probably argue that maybe internet access is not as widespread. Go
Mhm.
to your public library or talk to people. If networking, I think, is such a huge benefit. Reach out to people that have the information that you're looking for and knock on those doors. A lot of times people are afraid to have that conversation and step out of their comfort zones. So do the search, talk to people, get out there and seek out the information that you want to know.
So you made a really interesting point, and I do think when it comes to blockchain in particular, although this is changing as you see the traditional players entering, as we saw some big players enter the crypto trading space in the last couple of days, which I thought was really interestingly timed, but we'll have to save that tea for another conversation.
Mm.
But when you see companies like Fidelity, who are giants in the online brokerage space, start to adopt that, what you are going to see, I think, is a traditionalization of access to these careers in blockchain, where we've had this window of several years where you could kind of just show up and have the skill set of coding or the knowledge of the ecosystem and demonstrate yourself worthy and get a seat or start a fund or a firm or whatever, or a company.
Mhm.
And I think that was that, the whole decentralization ethos of the blockchain community really spoke to that. And I think that now that we see this kind of reversion to the mean, and I think, my concern is that the space will start to look a lot like, and we see this with this article I saw and what you're talking about, real world problems, the same kind of pattern matching that keeps
Mhm.
Black folks out of traditional finance is going to happen in fintech, and then obviously blockchain as a subset of fintech. Because just to be clear to our audience, right, fintech's not just about blockchain, although that's like the hot new sector, but sometimes fintech is just technology attached to a traditional financial
Right.
service, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with crypto or blockchain.
Mhm.
So you're going to see that same kind of gatekeeping and ticket taking, right? Ticket checking, right? Did you go to such and such school? Let me check your ticket. Do you have the stamp of approval? Are you credentialized in a way that we approve of? So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because if I were counseling a young person, I would say do all of those things, but just in case, you want to make sure that you have these kinds of credentials to make sure no one has a reason to exclude you.
So a lot of the conversations that I'm having right now within my organization is um, making sure that people feel accepted and that they belong.
Mhm.
Um, and not creating that culture, that Ivy League culture. "Oh, I had to go to this school to feel accepted." The reality is, and that a lot of companies are they're becoming aware of it. They're realizing that people who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, different communities, race, religion, etc., they have a lot to contribute in terms of the way they think to the
Mhm.
conversation. And then
Mhm.
that equates into um, innovation within a company.
Mhm.
So companies are paying attention to DEI in that way as to how they can kind of move forward, because the one lane thinking or the traditional way thinking from like a traditional school, Ivy League school, is not cutting it. We need to have more diverse opinion, which essentially cognitive diversity. And how do you seek out cognitive diversity? You look at areas like disability, whether that's people with different learning disabilities, people who think different, act different, religion, color, cultures, to make sure that they contribute to the discussions. And how do you make them contribute to the discussions? Make sure that you have a culture of inclusion within your workplace, that they feel like they can sit there at the table and have a discussion with you without feeling marginalized.
So I'm going to ask you a question we didn't previously discuss, but you brought something up that I thought was really interesting. And when you talk about like sort of diversity of thought,
Mhm,
cognitive diversity, sort of neurodivergence, all of these things, which I think are great and are very important. But is DEI trying to do too much at the same time, right? And how does that affect Black folks' ability to get access to these opportunities, right?
mhm, mhm,
Because then they say like, oh, but we hired this person who's neurodivergent, and therefore that's all our diversity slots. Sorry, or like the
yeah,
gas that is burned trying to include everyone or trying to have all of these different things. It's like, I think that's part of the reason why we see so much burnout in DEI professionals.
mhm,
Short tenures are typical in the space for heads of DEI at firms. And so, one of my concerns, something that sort of niggles in the back of my head, is just if DEI is so inclusively and broadly defined, then what is it, right? And how
mhm,
do we advocate for Black people? Not that I don't care about other people, and you can be Black and be all of these things above that we listed also at the same time.
mhm,
But sometimes I see people who are in power use that as a, because I think race is one thing that's like one of the hardest things to talk about on that DEI list. And people feel discomfort around it and they want to avoid it, so they'll go to the next thing on the list and focus on that instead. A great example of this is like white women and affirmative action, being like the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action.
Hmm. Um, so in terms of companies using that, the reality is that they are companies, and when we come to the table with the DEI initiatives, we sell it in a way that it benefits the firm, that there's a direct benefit to the firm. As a Black woman like yourself, I do want to see more Black people, Black women also at the table. I want to see them climbing the ladder. But in having conversations within organizations, I do try not to exclude other groups, but at the same time, I think there's a benefit in having specific resource groups dedicated um, to each group so that they feel like they belong. So, for instance, I'm a part of Women in Leadership. I'm also a part of because I'm Caribbean, so I'm also a part of Caribbean folks. So I bring um I bring up people that I would like to see, that they want to see me and I want to see them because we belong to the same group. So I think the solution there that I've implemented or I'm trying to implement within our organization is to make sure that we have these dedicated resource groups that speak towards the specific issues within those groups. And then collectively, we can go back to the business and say, listen, we are checking boxes, but in reality, we're really working for the benefit of the groups that we represent. And
Okay.
collectively, we can kind of bring something to the table. But I mean, you're right. When it goes up to the top, they're definitely looking for, well, this is the box we want to check. This is the box we want to check, and we're good.
Right.
That is the reality.
Right. They don't want anybody to take their shot. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
okay. So one of the things I thought was really interesting in your bio is that
Mm.
it says you were instrumental in bringing the bull statue to Miami. What are your thoughts? First of all, I want to hear, share with us a little bit about how that went down. And then what are your thoughts on the ongoing migration of financial and technology firms to South Florida and how that benefits Black folks in South Florida?
Mm. Okay, so part one of your question, how that
Right.
went down.
How that went down. Part one.
So it was definitely a brand campaign, but it had a lot of deep thought behind it. Uh, as a firm, a trade station, we've been in business for 40 years,
Mhm.
and since then, we've seen a lot of emerging companies like your Robin Hoods, your Weeble, your Tastyworks, etc. And they have brought to the table a communication style that's very challenging. They say what they want. They're very colorful in their speech versus as a traditional company, we can come across a little bit more rigid, more not so fluffy,
Right. Yeah, more
right? Kind of
conservative.
dry.
Yeah.
So the question is, how exactly do we get people to pay attention when we already have this personality of being a little dry?
Mhm.
Um, and when you look at it from that, we want to change our traditional view and we want to basically emerge into this um, new space where these companies are speaking this lingo. How do you turn, an old man hip? That's the
Right.
question. So that's how we approach this campaign. And um, the bull was born out of several iterations of, well, what can we do? And we threw some ideas at the table, and that one stuck.
Mhm.
Um, After we went through the process of all selections of studios and everything, there was one point that was a hang up, which was the balls. Why do we have a robot bull with balls? So that was a big piece of how it went down. And ultimately, I'll spare you the details, but essentially the decision was made um, for the bull not to have balls because of what it represented. It represented a new finance.
Okay. There was so much entertaining chatter on the Bird app about the lack of
Balls.
balls. The bull has no balls. And I thought it was really, really entertaining, but I
Mhm,
also thought it kind of distracted from the point, which
mhm,
is this is a new, I have believed in Miami for a really long time as a place to actually do real business and thought
mhm.
it was a natural place for more finance professionals in industry to locate. And I'm thrilled to see that come to fruition. And I think the bull is an excellent symbol of that, right? And so making that decision, which is kind of an artistic or strategic choice or whatever you want to call it, it certainly got people talking about it, right? And so now everybody knows that the bull is here, and maybe that accomplishes its purpose to a certain extent because of that conversation. Maybe if it weren't for that, people would not have talked about it quite as much, but that gave it some humor and a little
Yeah.
levity too, which it sounds like you were looking for in freshening the image of TradeStation.
Yes,
So well
yes,
done on that. Well done on that.
yes.
That's great. So, talking about these firms and making, a seat at the table, which is one of your themes, right? Um,
Mhm.
are these firms that have migrated to South Florida doing enough, not just TradeStation, right? But obviously, I'm sure, like, as part of this campaign to bring the bull to Miami and have a bull statue that lives here. Um, are these is this new wave of prosperity in finance and tech, how is that benefiting Black people here? Are they hiring local? Are they bringing people from New York or San Francisco or wherever? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
The migration is real. I mean, I can tell you that I've met so many people that they's like, "Oh, I'm from New York.
Mhm.
What are some great places to eat down here?" Or "I'm from New Jersey." The migration is real, and I feel that I've also met a lot of people that have been displaced as a result of the migration, and that displacement not only comes in the form of their jobs, but also in the increase in cost of things.
Oh
And
yeah,
people,
housing.
I mean, let's just call it what it is.
Yeah,
Prices are going through the roof.
right.
People got bid out of rental contracts,
Mhm.
so there's a real impact. And then when you look at Black communities that were already struggling to keep up, it's a real impact in those communities. Um, and then when you ask the question about are companies doing enough? If companies were doing enough, do you think we would have these DEI initiatives and all these conversations about the struggles that we have to go through and all this burnout? I don't think so. I
Right.
really don't.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really, and it really has to be, I think, a PPP, right? Like a public-private partnership where
Mhm,
you have the local government that's also got a vested interest in protecting the foundational population, right? That's here and being inclusive and making sure everyone gets brought along instead of importing all these rich folks from New York and California and just letting the chips fall where they may
mm,
around the people who were already here. And even, I mean, you really have to make a lot of money to not feel the pinch of, say, those housing prices, right? I know people who make plenty of money who were very hurt by some of the rent increases, inability to close on a home, et cetera. And that this sort of bull rush, right? Bull rush,
mhm.
which I think is simmering down now with the slowdown and so that brings me to my next question for you, which is like owing not only to the collapse of various crypto firms, but the general slowdown as the Fed tries to cool off this overheated economy and like, inflation, like practically hyper. I feel that in Miami, we experienced like third world level hyperinflation. Maybe it wasn't 100%, but I know people who got 100% rent increases just because that's not illegal.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
Right. And that's why I say it needs to be a public private partnership because there have to be some sort of sanity limits on what people can do in terms of raising rent prices, et cetera. And so, we're seeing layoffs certainly in the tech sector, right? We've seen some very high profile layoffs in the tech sector, which was probably a little loaded, and some slowdowns in hiring in traditional finance. And I expect
Mhm.
those things to converge a bit and for there to be some reductions in force at some of the major financial services firms. What do you think that means for fintech? And what do you think it means for Miami, which has a tradition of being a boom bust town? And we've seen many booms and busts over the years. And like, do those people get to move back into their house? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a cycle. It's a cycle that repeats itself
Mhm.
every few years, and this is just another cycle.
Mhm.
That's my straightforward answer on that. It's happening, and it'll happen again. This
Mhm.
is just one cycle that we're going through.
Mhm.
Uh, Crypto, it was hot. Fintech, it was hot. It brought a lot of people. The government was definitely really latching onto that and making sure that they brought that money into Miami, etc. And it was hot. And as a result, they're raising money like crazy. I mean, they're pumping money into it. And uh, I think that certain things couldn't keep up. Um, like like normal, that does happen, and this is the close of a cycle, and it will happen again.
Right. I mean, that's, I think, a lot of things, I mean, I've lived through a couple of cycles, a few. I've seen the dot com bust. I was at Lehman when it went bankrupt, et cetera. And so, it goes up, it goes down. So, you want to stay steady during that. And I think it's about sort of protecting your downside and your flank. But, we as Black people tend to be more vulnerable. Longer term, right? Sort of as an industry, what do you think specifically what's the unrealized as yet potential of fintech as a sector, specifically as it relates to our community? I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Like Cash App being a mode for people to get tips, right? And so, for example, instead of being subject to the $2 in somebody's pocket, they're probably getting Cash App $5 for a tip
Mhm.
instead of like the change in somebody's pocket, right? Um, and so that there's a bit of, for certain people, there's a transformational sort of income, way to sort of extract income if they're gigging or doing things where tips are involved. What do you think are some of for when you look down the road in the fintech industry, the upside to the Black community in general?
I think ease of transfer of assets.
Mhm.
I think that's a huge piece. I'll give you an example that's personal to me. Um, I'm Caribbean, and as Caribbean people, we typically transact money back home to help our communities back home. And in that respect, a lot of times those transfers aren't easy. Banking systems in third world countries are a little bit crippled, and in terms of having fintech companies being able to solve that gap, it could really help families from a like long-term perspective. So, say you have a sick family member in a distant area, they can get quick access to funds from another family member, sending that quickly, and they can have that right in their pockets using their phone and just transacting that business. I think that that kind of goes a long way and really helps out to like poor communities or poor families and kind of bridge that gap. So I do see a long-term impact from like ease to transact business or ease to like move money. So I think that that's a very good long-term benefit when it comes to looking at the Black community or Black families, or that's a personal example for me.
Right, right. Um, what about sort of real estate transfers? I mean, I know we've seen some NFT transactions, right? And facilitating the transfer of tangible like assets that have a physical location. Because cash is tangible, like physical money is tangible, but it also moves electronically, intangibly quite well, right? And so, but a house doesn't. Like a house is a house that you take physical possession of. But do you see that as a big boon to Black folks, or do you think that's just sort of a neutral?
I think that we probably should go back to your question about inclusion within the metaverse or inclusion
Mhm,
within that space. I think that that will kind of lag behind because
mhm,
of the access part not being there. And I think
mhm,
once we solve that education access, then that will be realized. But I
mhm.
don't see that impact coming immediately because the access to the information's not there yet.
Right, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
there is a lag, but we're working on it here. We're
We
working.
are, we are. Yes, we
You
are.
have you have
Yes.
made such a contribution to it, and believe it or not, we're out of time. So I
Oh,
really wanna I know. I
we
really
were
wanna
just talking, and I was like, "What?"
already out of time. But I
Oh,
really want to thank you. I mean, there's so many directions we could go given your background, and I feel like
right.
we touched a little bit on each. And so I really am so grateful that you made time to talk to us tonight and just share your thoughts and really tell our audience about fintech because I think that's a buzzword that people throw around, and I'm sure there are people who are like, I don't know what that is. So you really helped us get our arms around that tonight, and also just how we do get access to participating in running that. So I really want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Brigette. It was lovely meeting you.
Likewise, please watch our other MIA Media Group shows. Mondays, The Business of Black Business at 1 p.m. with Jay Reynolds. Tuesday, My Money, Your Money at 7 p.m. with yours truly, Brigette Lumpkins. Wednesday, Soul at 7 p.m. with Nikki Gellin. Thursday, Lunch with Legacy Leaders at 12 noon with Anne-Marie Sorrell. And The Flavor of South Florida at 7 p.m. with the legendary Chef Irie. And Fridays, Black Health at 2 p.m. with Dr. Michelle Kerwan. Let's work together to close that gap.